Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon. I'm very happy to welcome you to this regional technical meeting on education for sustainable development for 2030. My name is Alexander Leicht. I'm the Chief of Section of Education for Sustainable Development at Unesco. I'm very happy to moderate the session today. And just as one housekeeping announcement is that we have English, French, and German interpretation available, and you can find them as usual through the globe icon at the lower end of your Zoom screen. And I would like now to formally open the meeting, hand over right away the floor to our director, Ms. Vibeke Jensen. She's the director of the Division for Peace and Sustainable Development in UNESCO's education sector. Vibeke, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Alexander. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone, and a warm welcome to all of you to this Europe and North America regional technical meeting, which is organized within the framework of the UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development that took place last week. Had we all been in Berlin and met there, of course, we would have had an opportunity also to have these regional meetings on site. But as everything had to be virtual, we decided to postpone the regional meetings to this week. Many of you, I'm sure, attended the entire conference or parts of the conference, and I'm pleased to say that we had more than 70 ministers and vice ministers who took the floor, and more than 2,800 education and environment stakeholders who committed to take concrete steps to transform learning. The conference, which was followed online by more than 10,000 viewers, was, as you know, organized by UNESCO in cooperation with and very generously supported by Germany. The three-day virtual event successfully concluded with the adoption of what we call the Berlin Declaration on Education for Sustainable Development, which underlines a range of policies and actions to transform learning at all levels and for all age groups. The conference included also the announcement of a significant commitment of 18 European Union member states to the Esd for 2030 framework, which is the result of a call initiated by Germany during its presidency of the Council of the European Union. Today we're gathered for the regional technical meeting of the Europe and North America region, and we'll discuss how the commitments from the World Conference are translated into tangible and fruitful action at regional, national, and local levels. Our framework is framed by the Esd for 2030 roadmap. This is a roadmap for governments, education stakeholders, civil society, and learners of all ages to mobilize learning to achieve societal transformation for sustainable development. And Esd for 2030 aims to fully integrate Esd and the Sustainable Development Goals into policies, learning environments, capacity building of educators, the empowerment and mobilization of young people, and local level action. To succeed in this, we need to think globally, but act locally, nationally, and regionally. And as part of the Esd for 2030, every UNESCO member state is being invited to create a country initiative on Esd. These initiatives should build on ongoing efforts in Esd, as well as possibly creating new programs and activities. Every government is invited to create a network of actors within their country who are interested or active in implementing Esd. They may be policymakers, teachers, civil society, youth, the business sector, academia, and learners of all ages. And these networks can contribute to a plan of action for each member state to achieve the goals that the Esd for 2030 sets out. Since the launch of the roadmap, which was done at the end of 2020, a first group of 50 countries across the world has started to do their country initiatives, including 8 countries in the Europe and North America region. And in order to accelerate the concrete follow-up to the World Conference, This meeting will take stock of the preparation of the country initiatives on ESD for 2030 in this region and hear from the experiences of the first group of countries on how they have designed the initiative in alignment with their own ongoing national processes. From the lessons learned, we'll be able to discuss the possible challenges and opportunities for the implementation in the region. I'm very grateful to all the distinguished panelists that we have with us here today, and to all of you for joining us today. It is indeed encouraging to see the coalition of ESD promoters in the region, and I am confident that working together, we will be able to transform education to transform the world. So thank you again, and I look forward to the discussion this afternoon. And back to you, Alexander.
Thank you very much, Vibeke, for your introduction. We will move straight into the meeting. The way we propose to organize it is that we first have a series of short interventions from countries, from member states about their plans and their activities to implement ESD for 2030 that are already underway. And then we have a second round of short interventions that provide a regional perspective. And then we have questions and answers, questions from the audience, which will be directed to the panelists. We'll start with our country perspectives, with our sort of country plans on ESD for 2030. I'd like to ask just to kindly remind all speakers to stick to their 5 minutes, so that we really have some time to discuss afterwards and take audience questions to make this meeting as interactive as possible. We'll start with actually the host country of our big world conference. The German government provided most of the support that was needed to be able to hold this conference. And the responsible person in the Ministry of Education is Mr. Thomas Greiner, the Deputy Director General for Lifelong Learning in the Ministry of Education and Research. And I would like to pass over for an intervention from him.
Excellencies, dear Ms. Jensen, dear Mr. Leicht, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank UNESCO for the kind invitation to present Germany's efforts in implementing education for sustainable development into our education system and to give you an idea of our commitment, our country initiative within the UNESCO program ESD for 2030. Just 6 days ago, we had the whole world assembled at UNESCO's World Conference on ESD, and all agreed on a strong Berlin Declaration for ESD. We think it is a strong signal that 2,800 participants joined the conference and over 70 ministers expressed their commitment to ESD for 2030. Once again, I want to express my congratulations to UNESCO and especially to the ESD team for the great work and successful conference. The conference and the Berlin Declaration are the starting points to strengthen and continue our national actions for ESD for 2030. So first, let me give you 3 examples for the ESD structures we have set up in Germany, and which, in our opinion, can serve as a model for country initiative under the new program ESD for 2030. The first example. We followed UNESCO's recommendation already in 2015 to set up a multi-stakeholder network for ESD in Germany, because we were convinced that the introduction of the topic of sustainability into the whole education system needs a lot of support, a lot of players. First, we started with a joint agenda process. As we, the ministry, had committed ourselves To organize and finance the whole process, we had to tackle big questions like, how can we succeed to bring all relevant actors together in a structured process? What can we do to make them agree on a common action plan? Today we know a multi-stakeholder process is possible and can succeed. In Germany, more than 300 actors from civil society, science, business, the federal states and local authorities work together intensively in 6 expert forums, partner networks and a youth forum, coordinated by the main steering body on ESD in Germany called the National Platform ESD. Now that we are starting the new program ESD for 2030, everybody is committed to continue the cooperation. They still share our goal of implementing ESD along the chain of lifelong learning. So the common work will continue. We are now including new stakeholders in our national process, for example, from the digital media industry, from our cultural council, and from integration and inclusion federations. The second effort I would like to inform you about is the adoption of the National Action Plan on ESD in Germany in 2017 by our national platform. This plan defines 130 objectives and nearly 350 measures to scale up ESD in the German education system. Education plans and curricula are targeted as well as pre- and in-service training and education of educators in formal and non-formal education. All members of the national platform serve as advocates of ESD and are committed to the action plan. This plan was a milestone for ESD in Germany because it belongs to all participants of the national process. The action plan addresses all 5 priority action areas and will be implemented until 2030. During this time, it will be continuously further developed and adapted to new developments. Finally, I would like to tell you that we have also implemented a national monitoring project to map our progress in the implementation of the National Action Plan for ESD. The monitoring is done by the team of our scientific advisor at the Freie University Berlin. It tracks the status of ESD and the trends in the German education system. The results are directly integrated into the discussion within our ESD bodies. In 2020, we have published a first interim balance report. The results show we are progressing, but in some fields the progress could be faster. Last year we also redesigned our website, the Esd Portal. It is the central communication platform for ESD in Germany. And guess which pages is in the highest demand? It's the explanation of what is ESD. This shows how important our efforts are to communicate and explain ESD to everybody in a language everybody is understanding. So let's keep our goal. Let's keep our excellent cooperation to reach this goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Mr. Greiner. Mr. Greiner was unable to join us live, but we're very grateful that he was able to, on very short notice, send in this video recording, because it was very important for us, of course, to have Germany as the host of the conference, and also this with this very systematic process on implementing ESD represented at this meeting. I'd like to move on to a second leading country in education for sustainable development and a long-standing partner of UNESCO in the work on ESD, Sweden. And I'm very happy to have Ms. Johansson here, the Secretary General of the Swedish Commission for UNESCO. So I'll hand over to you, Ms. Johansson. And I would also like to remind all participants, before I give you the floor, whenever there are questions, you can use the Q&A function in the Zoom, and we will take note of your questions. So Ms. Johansson, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to this important follow-up meeting on the conference last week, which was very nice to attend the conference, also with a very professional organization around it. Sweden have a holistic and integrated approach to education for sustainable development. And to ensure lifelong learning for sustainable development and achieve a transition to a sustainable society, education for sustainable development must be a fundamental part of formal education, informal education, and non-formal education. It cannot be seen as a separate subject, something to top on, but instead be integrated in education within many subjects. Education for sustainable development should not stop at providing knowledge about the conditions in the world, but also promote the will and ability to influence development in a sustainable direction. It must instill respect for human rights and democracy and promote gender equality, keys to a more sustainable world. Policy level is, of course, a fundamental for building and strengthening education for sustainable development. And today, a number of agencies are mandated from the government in Sweden to work with education for sustainable development. And ESD is incorporated into governing documents at all levels of the Swedish educational system, including curricula for preschool, curricula for compulsory school, and curricula for Swedish higher education. Even so, there are plans to commission new state agencies with a mandate connected to Agenda 2030, including within the field of vocational training. And in the 1st of July this year, the law regulating higher education in Sweden will be changed to strengthen their mission to promote sustainable development, to secure a healthy and good environment, economic and social welfare, and justice. Thank you for changing slide, because we can change again. Education for sustainable development concerns everyone. Government agencies, civil society organizations, and local communities. We need to work together, exchanging views and knowledge, and push the agenda within the different parts of society. In Sweden, local authorities are responsible for providing education at compulsory and upper secondary level, and of course, play a very vital role and key role in promoting education for sustainable development in schools. Local level is also where many people find their own engagement and their own possibilities to engage in these issues. Civil society organizations are key actors in Sweden in teacher trainings, producing educational resources, and contributing to capacity development. And of course, we have a very strong tradition of non-formal education in Sweden with the study associations that are very important for grown-ups and those outside the formal educational system. So, formal foundation with policies has been laid. Now we need to focus on implementation and follow-up. And these two issues are, of course, very much connected. There are a lot of activities in Sweden. Teachers, students, researchers are active. What we strive for now is a more systematic implementation and what steps to be taken there. What we do today and will do more in the future is systematic follow-up of the assignments given to authorities and learn from that. What can we learn? What can we improve? Right now, the Swedish School Inspektionen is conducting a quality audit, and the purpose is to examine the quality with which schools work to ensure that learning for sustainable development characterizes the education as a whole. This is ongoing right now. We are also conducting a survey with interviews among actors from universities, the education system, civil society, learners themselves, to map where we are today and what different actors believe are the most important initiatives and steps to take. We have a very broad participation in this survey, and we hope that will give us guidance for the future. And with all this as a basis, the next step is, of course, to analyze and see from the point of view where we are right now, how can we take steps further to promote education for sustainable development into the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johansson, for this very interesting snapshot from Sweden, showing also how many stakeholders, how many actors are involved on your side. I'll move on sort of in our series of leading ESD implementing countries, and we move to the Netherlands. And I'm very happy to give the floor to Mr. Gerbert Kunst, who is the Director of International Policy in the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science of the Netherlands. Mr. Kunst, over to you.
Thank you very much, dear Chair. Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm grateful for the invitation to exchange views with you today and to share the Dutch approach on education for sustainable development. Next slide, please. The Netherlands warmly welcomes the Berlin Declaration, which rightfully underlines the importance and urgency of education and learning pathways for sustainable development. In the Netherlands, we approach this subject from different angles. Firstly, we do, of course, use the formal learning pathways. And in this respect, it's important to know that in the Netherlands, our constitution prescribes that our government determines the final goals and the main rules for our education policy. But it may not determine how this final goal is achieved. That's the primacy of the education professionals, schools and teachers. And secondly, even more than through formal learning pathways, and more often than most other countries do, I suspect, we make use of non-formal and informal learning paths as well. I'll give you some examples later on, and I think our ratio is 30% formal learning, 70% non-formal, informal learning. And this collection of different learning paths falls within the national ESD policy framework called Duurzaam Door, Learning for Transitions and Social Innovations 2021-2024. In the Netherlands, we have a steering committee, a national steering committee for ESD, in which all involved organizations participate. Think of ministries, provincial and local governments, water authorities, NGOs, the research sector, the business sector, citizens representatives, and of course, the education sector. Next slide, please. And as I just mentioned, the Dutch government can only give guidelines to educational institutions to be reached and boundaries to adhere to. It mainly uses outcome-oriented approach. And in line with this principle, a group of networks for all levels of education have gathered under the umbrella of the cooperation Learning for Tomorrow. Learning for Tomorrow is committed to anchor sustainability in the DNA of education, from toddler to professional, on the basis of an integrated approach, the so-called whole school approach. Based on sustainable development goals, this broad approach means that in addition to environmental aspects, attention is also given to the social side of sustainability, like equality and inclusiveness. And by making use of networks, meetings, events, and a variety of projects, Learning for Tomorrow connects teachers, schools, and organizations that value sustainable development in education. And all of these activities by national and local governments, different funds as well as by the school themselves. Next slide, please. So many of the sustainability challenges of our time can only be solved jointly. In the Netherlands, for this purpose, extensive and effective use is made of non-formal and informal learning. In fact, in the Netherlands, around 70% of all actions to point out the importance of sustainable development to our citizens go through non-formal and informal learning pathways. In all of these projects involved, a few leading principles are key. First, they all work around the principles of coalition, co-creation, and commitment. Secondly, they all depend on the sharing of good practices and the making of use of meta-learning. Thirdly, they combine bottom-up and grassroots approaches with top-down approaches. And finally, monitoring and evaluation mechanisms in all instances test how these projects support the desired transition. Some great examples of such cooperation projects in the Netherlands are combating food spillage and promoting short-chain foods, projects related to energy transition and climate adaptation, cooperation in the field of community gardening for biodiversity, and as well as devising and organizing change for circular building. And let me, to end this presentation, briefly zoom in to the latter. Next slide, please. As you may know, the Netherlands is a densely populated country of more than 70 million people, with a still growing population. And the coming decades, we will face a major challenge in housing construction. In the next 10 years alone, 1 million future-proof homes will have to be built. In a limited space available, these homes must contribute to biodiversity, climate change, and to the quality of life. They must be energy efficient and therefore be built with circular building materials. This requires a new way of thinking, a new way of working together, actually a new way of learning. Our ESD program, Duurzaam Door, organizes these learning processes in this area in which municipalities, schools, students, architects, construction companies, and social organizations jointly arrive at the most sustainable solutions. Furthermore, the program supports models for sustainable tendering, the national exchange of good practices, and reaching a wider audience through competitions. And it has led to, for example, stricter criteria focused on sustainability in a national building decree. Thus, by using a mix of learning paths, most suitable to each situation, the Netherlands gives substance to education in a sustainable development. And with that, I do hope we provide, with a slightly different approach, Dutch solutions for our global society challenges. Next slide, and thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Kunz, thank you very much indeed for this very, very interesting overview, this very holistic approach in the Netherlands, and also this very strong explicit emphasis on non-formal and informal in addition to the formal education. We move on to Hungary, another country highly active in ESD and in the area of whole institution approaches, but other action areas equally well developed. And I'm happy to give the floor to Ms. Monica Reti from the Ministry of Human Capacities in Hungary, presenting the Hungarian implementation of ESD for 2030. Ms. Reti, over to you.
Thank you. A warm welcome from cold Hungary to everyone. And as a senior expert in the field of ESD, I'm happy to introduce you the process of establishing the country initiative in Hungary today. Next, please. So when UNESCO notified the Ministry of Human Capacities that Hungary was chosen as one of the 12 countries to propose country initiatives within the framework of UNESCO ESD for 2030, we felt both honored and delighted, because in the past decades, and especially in the recent years, we put quite a great effort in establishing the policy framework, as well as supporting and institutionalizing initiatives in the field of ESD, and quite many of them. So after the decision and discussions with UNESCO, we identified key stakeholder groups and invited their representatives to an inception workshop, which took place a few weeks ago, where they settled on a shared vision and they could find shared values and aims. This was a starting point for further discussions in the coming weeks about a well-established country initiative that partners feel ownership for. We had invited, next please, thank you. So we had invited participants from about 12 stakeholder groups, and from the 50 invitations, 46 representatives could actually eventually join. As for decision makers, we had 5 ministries on board, including the Commissioner for Fundamental Rights and the Parliamentary Committee on Sustainable Development. We had nearly all groups from formal education, with indication from vocational education to join later, as well as from informal and non-formal education providers. We also had partners from business and enterprises, including the Chamber of Industry and Commerce of Hungary, the Hungarian Business Leaders Forum, the Hungarian Association of Environmental Enterprises, and the Business Council for Sustainable Development in Hungary. So we had quite a diverse group of people at the inception workshop, which took place on the 11th of May. Next, please. So the workshop, after introducing as advised the concept of UNESCO ESD for 2030, including the 5 pillars, and setting the aim, participants worked in groups to identify the strengths, the opportunities, the aspirations, and goals in ESD in Hungary. Let me give you a brief insight into this. Next, please. In Hungary, the main strength is that the policy and institutional frameworks exist, and ESD as a topic is wholeheartedly welcome at all levels of education. We have institutionalized programs such as the Sustainability Thematic Week, which reach every year more than 1/3 of all students in Hungary. We have every 3rd student at kindergarten and also at primary and secondary school level to attend whole institutional ESD schools, called eco schools and green kindergartens in the country. And also we have many other successful programs to build on. Next, please. This can be a foundation to mainstreaming existing practices of sustainable businesses, technology, including elements of circular economy, and promoting a shared concept, reaching all age groups, especially senior citizens that might have been less focused lately. And that was a very well set aim for the country initiative as well. Next, please. For this, communication about sustainable development as well as ESD needs to be built on shared vision and values, and it needs to be promoted systematically across sectors, including vocabulary and messages. Also, partners expressed the wish for coordinated efforts and enriched collaboration in the field of ESD, which was a very promising result of the first workshop. Next, please. All these efforts may lead to better reaching the whole population with clear messages about sustainable development, raising their sense of responsibility, and promoting actions and collaborations for sustainability, even beyond 2030 and the 2030 aims as aspired. This is where we are now, and from there we aim to formulate the exact country initiative in the coming weeks. And thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Réti, for explaining the Hungarian approach to very systematically also develop this country initiative under the ESD for 2030 framework. We move on to Cyprus, another strong proponent of education for sustainable development within the country, but then also in the sub-region, and we will hear a little bit more about that later. And I'm happy to give the floor to Ms. Stella Hadjiachileos from the Unity of Education for Environment and Sustainable Development in the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports and Youth of Cyprus. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank UNESCO for their kind invitation to Cyprus to present in this important follow-up meeting and share a short presentation regarding Cyprus plans on the ESD for 2030. Next, please. ESD in Cyprus, ever since 2008, when the National Action Plan on ESD was adopted for implementation, was set as a high priority. The ESD National Action Plan permeates horizontally all national policies related to the environment and sustainable development, integrating international and regional movements and documents and national particularities and needs. It captures holistically and systemically all main actions that are needed for integrating ESD in all forms of education, and many achievements can be identified through its implementation, such as the integration of ESD in national curricula, professional development courses, integration of ESD in non-formal education, the enactment of a permanent mechanism and structure for ESD implementation. Achievements of its implementation have been presented and recognized internationally as good examples. Nevertheless, many things remain to be done for making ESD the key driver for SDG achievement, especially for responding to SDG 4. Next, please. Why is the Republic of Cyprus participating to the UNESCO country initiative? The UNESCO ESD roadmap coincides with the Cyprus decision to revise the National Action Plan for ESD in order to develop communication and advocacy actions to reflect the SDGs in educational practices and frameworks at the national level. Cyprus responded positively to the invitation for participating, and this was because the ESD for 2030 can operate as concrete framework for revising the ESD National Action Plan to identify weaknesses and challenges and to address them as such. Moreover, the initiative strengthens coordination and cooperation at global, regional, national, subnational, and local levels concerning policies and practices in ESD. Next, please. The Cyprus Initiative ESD for 2030 is led personally by the Minister of Education, Mr. Prodromos Prodromou, who declared the commitment of Cyprus to support actions focusing on the SDGs within the global framework for implementation of ESD for 2030, his personal intervention during the recent UNESCO ESD for 2030 conference. He also expressed the commitment of the Republic of Cyprus to participate actively to the UNESCO member states initiative for integrating or strengthening the 5 priority action areas of the roadmap ESD 2030. Next, please. This slide, the draft timeline for the Cyprus initiative development is briefly presented, starting in March 2021 and extending to February 2022. Therefore, as we can see at this moment, the approval of Cyprus participation to the initiative has taken place, and the appointment of the Unit of Education for the Environment and Sustainable Development as the coordinating body. Next, please. Next, please. As presented on this slide, the process of development of the Cyprus Draft Action Plan for ESD 2030 is comprised of 10 distinct steps. Initially, there will be an analysis of the actions based on the 5 key action priority areas of ESD for 2030 that have already been achieved through the current ESD action plan and identification of missing gaps. Second, there will be an analysis of the UNESCO roadmap action priority areas and suggested activities and correlation with the actions already implemented at the national level, followed by identification and needs analysis of teachers regarding actions that they considered as most important to promote ESD in the framework of the 5 key priority areas. Next step is identification of the stakeholders that can engage in each key priority, meetings for discussing the actions that can be included in each priority area. Consultations with youth groups and organizations will also be held. Draft plan with all proposed activities for each priority area will be prepared and disseminated for comments and feedback. Synthesis of the selected comments and finalization of the draft action plan will be done after that. This is step 9. And the final step will be the organization of public rehearsals and consultation meetings for its finalization. Next, please. So thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much for this very systematic approach from Cyprus and its presentation. With this example from Cyprus, we move on to the regional perspective. We have another short round of panelists that will speak about the regional perspective on the implementation of education for sustainable development. And first, we invite a colleague from the European Commission. The European Commission, of course, well known for a very strong commitment to sustainability, most recently through the Green Deal. And I'm happy to welcome Mr. Michael Teutsch, the head of the unit Schools and Multilingualism from the Directorate General for Education, Sport, Youth and Culture, to share his perspective on education for sustainable development implementation. Over to you.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Leicht, for the invitation, and hello to everybody. Indeed, it's a great opportunity to think together how we can join forces. As you just said, the Green Deal and education for sustainable development is a key priority of this commission. I mean, the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, the Executive Vice President Franz Timmermans, they've both sent very strong messages asking all policy areas in the Commission to support this transition towards a more sustainable and more climate-friendly society, and economy and education is part of that. Can you put the next slide, please? You see, the Green Deal is one of the flagship initiatives of this Commission, trying to the climate neutrality, but also looking at not only economic, but also social impacts of it. As I said, all policy areas combined, and also big efforts and lots of thinking what we can do in order to do this together with the actors on the ground. How can we mobilize associations, citizens, companies to contribute to this? And as part of this, we of course also look into education together with our member states. Next slide, please. As you can see, what you have here is, as it comes, the education ministers of the European Union have just agreed on a new education strategy just in February this year, which is sort of valid for the next years. Education strategy meaning topics on which we exchange practice. We would like to look at what countries are doing on the basis of common goals and to move forward together. You know, member states are in charge of education, but we hope by working together in Europe, we advance. And you see the topics here. If you look at quality, inclusion, green, teachers, this corresponds very much to the sustainable development goals that we also have. I just want to say a bit more on this particular green part, as I said, because of the Green Deal being such an important part of the agenda of this Commission. Can you go to the next slide, please? We have a number of activities there. I mean, we've seen here that we have some countries who have done sort of wonderful initiatives. What really nice to listen now here to Cyprus, Hungary, Sweden, Netherlands. We still think, if we look at the UNESCO reports, that you've yourself also seen how many challenges there still persist in making the agenda move forward. And now there's a big political emphasis and commitment coming out of the Berlin Declaration. We want to make our contribution in order to help the implementation via a regional approach, via the European Union, and through a number of actions. One is to put together a council recommendation, which is sort of a policy line where we think, based on your work in UNESCO, based on what our member states do, what are recommendations on making it happen, what we have discussed here. So that's the ambition for a council recommendation to be agreed by education ministers in the next 1.5 years. We also want to work, on the second point, to develop a so-called a competence framework on climate change and sustainable development, which would look a bit more closely, what does it take from learners at the more individual level, what is needed in order to contribute to this work, because we all know there's lots of awareness, there's lots of commitment, but I mean, actually turning to action is quite a big challenge. Third point, Education for Climate Coalition. That's a bottom-up initiative where we really would like to mobilize citizen stakeholders to support them in taking action at the local and regional level, where we know the energy is and where the solutions come from. And we support this with cooperation, but with also our funding instruments. I mean, I myself work a lot with the Erasmus Plus program, which provides lots of initiatives for putting schools together, for putting adult education institutions together, vocational training institutions, to put their heads together, to compare their solutions, and to develop policies together in order to get inspiration for decision-making at home. Next one, the idea, I mean, just very briefly to say what's our approach. I put this slide, which may come from one of you. I don't actually remember where it is. It's very well known. One view, I still use it a lot if I have to put one point on what we're actually doing here. It has been said by the Swedish and the Netherlands colleagues and Hungarians. This is a whole institution approach. We need to look at curricula, but also how institutions are organized in order to make this advance. And this is the initiative sort of I work a lot on myself with my team together with the higher education colleagues in the next years in order to develop an EU-wide policy approach. And my last point, if you go to the next slide, please. There's a lot going on at the moment already on UNESCO's side, in the member states. So we are currently launching a public consultation in which we hope that all stakeholders interested in this topic will tell us what they think would be the most useful for the European Union now to move ahead in order to develop such a council recommendation. What are the type of actions, what is needed? What is the policy line that is needed? The public consultation is going to open in the next few weeks. Just invite all of you, if you have the possibility, to participate in this public consultation so that we can together join forces in order to see how can the EU as a regional actor very much committed to the overall global agenda contribute moving ahead, because that's what I see. We have that lots of good intention. Making it happen is the challenge now, and it would be great if you could if we could join forces also in this public consultation to make it better happen. So last slide is just to have a look, and then I give back the floor to the chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teutsch. It's wonderful to see these ambitious plans, and we're very much looking forward to seeing them rolled out and to working wherever it suits together with you. We're moving to a second regional perspective, and I'm very happy to invite the chair of the UNECE Steering Committee on Education for Sustainable Development, Ms. Arabella Zachario, to provide her perspective. Arabella, over to you.
Sorry. Dear Alexander, Mr. Chair, dear colleagues from UNESCO, first of all, allow me to congratulate you on behalf of the UNECE Steering Committee about the great conference that organized last week, as well as the German government. And I would like to express also our thanks for inviting us as UNECE Esd Steering Committee to contribute to this regional dialogue regarding the effective implementation of the new roadmap for ESD 2030. UNECE Esd Steering Committee is working traditionally very closely with UNESCO, and one of its main objectives is to strengthen and foster intersectoral and intergovernmental stakeholder partnership for ESD on regional level. Since 2004, where the UNECE Steering Committee established an ESD in the region, most of the member states developed and integrated their ESD national action plans, which guided countries to promote ESD in their national levels. And of course, this mainly based on the 3 priority areas, which was also aligned with UNESCO, as this was emerged by the decade, the UNESCO ESD decade, the Global Action Plan, and of course now the new roadmap for ESD for 2030. In the recent fourth evaluation process, what is indicated is that most of the countries that developed their national strategies based in many international policies, and UNESCO was one of these. Now, recently, in collaboration with many international and regional mechanisms, the The UNCSD Steering Committee is elaborating the UNCSD strategic planning, which is, of course, aims to strengthen the position of ESD in education, in formal, non-formal, and informal level, to assess the national and regional processes on ESD, and propose tangible measures and ways to integrate ESD in national and regional level. There was a need for identifying realistic and measurable targets. Also, it was considered that it was a necessity for strengthening people to reconsider their lifestyles and support education systems to respond sufficient to the necessary changes on education in the COVID-19 era. Establishment also of collaborative platforms of collaboration such as UNESCO, EU, and other international regional processes were considered as important. Next slide, please. The future plans for UNC region regarding the UNESCO roadmap.
Sorry, excuse me, your sound is really bad. So the interpreters are not interpreting right now because they are not able to do it. So please, if you could move a little bit higher your microphone, because otherwise it
can you listen me now clearly, better?
I don't know, maybe it's the quality of the microphone, but it's not that good.
You can listen to me now? Please, can you hear me?
Well, we can hear you. The thing is that it's not good enough for interpreters to interpret accurately what you're saying. That's why.
Okay,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's my duty as technician to do it.
Okay, thank you. Recently in the UNCSD regions developed the UNCSD strategic plan for 2030, which is based on a series of 4 main strands, which are closely related with the 5 key action areas of UNESCO ESD roadmap. Quality education, which aims to promote quality mechanisms in institutions and various fields of education. The whole institution approach, which is a transition from a whole school approach, aiming to support any institution to become sustainable. ICT and ESD, which is one of the main strands, especially during the COVID period. And of course, the strengthening of entrepreneurship and innovation in order to reorient people, and especially young people, to green jobs and sustainable growth. This strategic plan is based on well-planned activities to support countries in these 4 priority strands, and is giving special emphasis to the monitoring of this UNCSD strategic planning. Also, an innovation in the UNSD region is the establishment, the launching very recently, of the Youth ESD platform in UNSD region, aiming to involve youth in planning and in making decisions on ESD, to engage the youth in the for ESD in the UNSD region, and of course to establish a platform of communication with other processes led by UNESCO in 2030 agenda. Next slide, please. By synthesizing how UNCSD Steering Committee meets UNESCO ESD roadmap, we can say that is provide an advancing policy within the new UNCSD strategic planning 2030 in the UNC region. The 4 main strands of the UNC strategic planning are closely aligned with the 5 key priority areas. There is a strong consensus and willingness of youth participation and activation on ESD as a key target group. And of course, the revised format for the UNCSD strategy is taking into consideration the UNESCO ESD for 2035 key priority areas. And of course, UNCSD Steering Committee as a regional mechanism aims that will work in close collaboration with UNESCO and with other regional processes in order to establish ESD in governmental level, in educators, leaders, youth, and civil society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arabella, for this perspective from the UNECE and the region-wide activities that you are coordinating. Before I move on, let me just remind the audience, all participants, to please, whenever you have questions, put them in the Q&A. It looks like we will have some time to go back to our panelists and have an exchange, and we will try then to pick up your questions that you will put there. I'm moving on now to Professor Michael Skoulos, UNESCO chair, and in particular here speaking from the Mediterranean Committee on Education for Sustainable Development, working in the Mediterranean, in the European Mediterranean, but also then bringing in and collaborating with countries in the Arab States region. So I'm very happy to have this particular perspective part of our meeting. And Professor Skoulos, Michael, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexander. Let me start by thanking UNESCO for giving us this opportunity, but also, and in particular, the ESD unit of UNESCO for the excellent conference together with the Germany you have provided to us. I would like to start by sharing, thank you. Since Alexander mentioned this north-south role, I would like to say that in this very difficult north-south, east-west interface, we all know the problems in the region. We are particularly happy to have the cooperation with 3 UN bodies, starting with UNESCO and the regional office of Venice, with the Barcelona Convention under UNEP-MAP, with UNICE. Just Arabella mentioned the activities in this area, but also the Union for the Mediterranean, which brings also the EU countries, all EU countries with the South, non-EU countries and Balkans, and the League of Arab States. But not only, it is not a top-down, it is also and mainly a bottom-up, and this is why we have been entrusted as MIO and MEDIS to serve this, facilitate the Secretariat. And let me say that all the preparations for the conference, but the dissemination also of the results is going to the 133 organizations of MIO, the 6,000 members of MEDIS, the Mediterranean, the network of Mediterranean universities for sustainable development, the Circle of Mediterranean Parliamentarians for Sustainable Development, the Circle of Mediterranean Journalists for Environment Sustainability, and many others, because each one of them, many of them, have many members. This preparation that followed also the excellent series of UNESCO webinars tried to summarize all these inputs in a meeting on the 20th of April, where we had ministries and others confirming their commitment for ESD, confirming and recognizing the still important needs on ESD in the different countries, emphasizing the importance of a regional body, a platform linking north, south, east, west, and also the particular interest in linking environmental and cultural aspects in this region with the policies, and as I said, the links with non-state actors as well. Next one, please. I'm not going to read what we have agreed during the meeting. And on the right side of the transparencies, you see how the strategy for the Mediterranean was actually agreed, starting with ministers of environment and moving rest, What is the important thing here is that the Mediterranean is a hotspot on really everything, is warming faster than the rest of the world except from Antarctica. Loss of biodiversity is with us. The ongoing political and socioeconomic challenges, high unemployment of youth, migration, exclusion, all aggravated also by the pandemic. Next one, please. So the answer to that is that first, we cannot approach this only by national initiatives. We need, particularly in this area, where we feel the common body of water bringing us together, that there is a need for this regionality. And actually, this is an eco-region, bringing also three regions together, three continents together. We presented the strategy in the Nagoya, and we have used the EU support for having actually the strategy in place. The next one, please. The Mediterranean strategy actually gives emphasis to the cooperation between different levels of governance and different bodies, bringing the other, according to the guidance of the SDGs and the philosophy behind, expanding not only with education, but also with all other ministries dealing with sustainable development goals. Next one, please. And in fact, in the priorities, we have identified nearly all key issues that are identified through the dialogue and the declaration, with green-blue economy, with climate change, of course, and biodiversity, circular economy, sustainable consumption production, Mediterranean food and diet, advancing capacities of educators, the whole institute approach. And we will be very glad to actually contribute actively to this, the dialogue Mr. Toch mentioned before. Next one, please. And in fact, we have tried to have the different webinar series reflected in the work we are doing, and the number of specific actions that already are in the pipeline, financed by different sources, even partly, but as we have managed until now, this is going to be implemented. I would like to mention in particular the series of digital and printed material provided in 3 languages or more for all schools in the region. The summer universities we co-organize with MAB, Man and the Biosphere system, with the office of the regional office in Venice of the Unesco, a series of things that are supported also directly or indirectly by the European Union on single-use plastics, on marine litter, on empowering marginal groups in food projects. There is a big menu of activities that become from the region available to the countries and to the non-state actors. Next one, please. I wanted to mention also that Cyprus generously will support 5 publications showcasing the good practices in the 5 priority areas for the entire Mediterranean. We all know the 5 areas. And also, I would like to close by saying, next one, please, that our role needs to be further utilized by all parties, UNESCO first, but all parties, in making the Mediterranean an example for other difficult regions where this north, south, east, west dialogue is not always very easy. And education is recognized by everybody as a very good tool in doing what we try in the next 10 years, which is a very critical period for all of us. Thank you very much indeed.
Great, thank you very much, Professor Skoulos, for this important regional and this important bridging work that you're doing in the region. I'm moving on now to our next panelist, Ms. Tammy Randall, UK UNEC Youth Focal Point on Education for Sustainable Development and project lead of the Futures Forward Academy in Gibraltar. You will provide the perspective from your youth focal point role. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for having me here today on this panel. It really is an honor to be joining you and to be giving that youth perspective. As you said, I'll be talking about, first of all, my role as project lead of the Futures Forward Academy in Gibraltar, but also talking about my role as the UK Youth Focal Point to the UNEC Steering Committee on ESD. So first of all, what is the Futures Forward Academy? What is the work that's currently being done in the UK and Gibraltar on ESD? So the Futures Forward Academy really is a leadership academy in sustainable development, essentially, created by the Commissioner for Sustainable Development and Future Generations, Professor Daniela Tilbury. So what we've been doing over the past 6 to 8 months is bringing together a group of young people between the ages of 20 and 30 who have leadership potential and who have the desire to make a difference and to learn more about sustainable development, but who really have no experience in this area or no support. So this has been our inaugural year, and we've had 9 academy members who are currently nearing the end of their academy experience. And as I said, really, the aim is to bring sustainability and ESD to those who haven't had the chance within formal education systems, perhaps, to learn about what sustainability is and what it means to be a sustainable leader. And in doing so, we hope to create a Gibraltar which is future fit, which has policies which are fit for the future, and which are sustainable and in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. So our members come from a real diversity of backgrounds and professions, which I think is just so important. We have teachers, lawyers, students, architects, and this will help us to further embed ESD into the various sectors of our local community. The program has a number of elements, which include workshops on issues such as systems thinking, futures thinking, purposeful leadership, for example. And we also have had a series of webinars online where we bring together change makers and leaders from across the international sustainability community to talk about their experience and to share their perspectives on how to become a leader for sustainable and positive change. So I think the real change that this program brings is that those who are members are not experts in sustainable development. This is their first time within this sort of context. And I think it is really taking ESD out of that traditional and formal environment, which is so valuable. In future years, we also hope to extend the initiative outside of Gibraltar in the UK and potentially include other members and other youth delegates within the UNEC youth network. So that brings me on to my other role, which I mentioned earlier, is that of the UK Youth Focal Point within the UNEC Steering Committee on ESD. And I'll be sharing my personal perspectives on that and the work we're doing. So I've been the UK Youth Focal Point since November of the last year. And over the past 2 years, the Steering Committee has been working towards establishing a youth group to help support its work and play a role in the work it's doing. this youth group was formalized just a couple of weeks ago into a formal youth network. And I think...
Μπορείς να έρθεις να δω τις ερωτήσεις.
Sorry? Sorry.
Sorry, go on. Go on. I think
it's really the role of the steering committee of the youth network, apologies, is really key, and the steering committee has done a great job in engaging, connecting us, and also empowering us to play a role in the work they're doing and to bring in our own ideas and perspectives. So I think this can be done through a number of channels. First of all, formally, through the formal channels provided by the steering committee itself, in terms of providing our opinions, our advice and perspectives on the 2030 strategy, for example, that Arabella mentioned earlier. And the space has really been created for us to do so, and for us to play, I think, a big role in participating in the formal meetings and in sharing the youth voice, which perhaps is often lacking from these sorts of institutions and groups. But I think even more importantly, what the youth network has done, and maybe even more informally, is give us a platform to talk about the work we are each doing individually back home, and to share our experiences and our best practice, which is crucial in implementing and improving the way in which we implement ESD. I think, however, there remains, and this is just a general point that I think is true across the board, that there's still a lot of disconnect in the work that we're doing, and it will be really key as we go forward within the network for us to really drive the idea of combining those different synergies and joining up our various projects in order to be more efficient and to engage more people. I think it will also be important to carry on increasing awareness of the work that the members of the youth network are doing, and we have been given the opportunity to lead an upcoming publication from the steering committee showcasing the work we are doing. So I think that's going to be fantastic, and that will be a real opportunity for us to further engage with the steering committee members, but also other youth networks. So thank you very much. That's just my brief perspective as the UK Youth Focal Point. I'll be sharing in the chat some links to the Futures Forward Academy, which I mentioned earlier, and happy to take any further questions. Thank you very much for the chance to speak today.
Great, thank you very much, Tammy, for your very interesting and relevant perspective. We will move on now to the Q&A session. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A function, and I think one of the questions, or actually there were 2 or 3 questions around monitoring and effectiveness, and I would like to pick out this question, and if you agree, would go to our country representatives on the panel and invite very brief comments on how you're planning to monitor or assess to monitor your initiative, and how to assess the effectiveness basically of what you're doing, and of overall the ESD integration into education. So just some short thoughts around this question, which I think is relevant for all the panelists. And if I may, Ms. Johansson, can I start with you just for a few comments on the monitoring aspect?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. It's a very, very relevant and important one. I think it differs what you want to monitor and where within this huge system that we need to work with you are. I can take as an example the evaluation that has been made in Sweden when it comes to higher education. And there was a task given by the government to all the universities in Sweden to work with to integrate sustainable development in their work broadly. And when the evaluation was done, it was a set of criteria put up, covering, for example, was it integrated in the steering documents? Was it somewhere in the organization? Did it have a special place in the organization? Did they have set goals for the work that was kind of gave a clear direction? Was there a systematic follow-up? How was the competence within the leadership and within the teachers and other staff? Was there possibility to be educated further within the organization in this area? Did they work interdisciplinary with these issues? And how was, of course, one level was also how was it integrated within the courses and in the teaching itself? So it ranged from the organization and the steering documents to the actual kind of work being done with the students. And the two other issues was how much integration there was with the students around this issue, and there's also a gender perspective, how that was covered. So that is how it was done, this particular evaluation. But I think, as I said, many of these aspects will probably come back in other evaluations, but I think there will also be others. But I think what is important is to stress also that when you have to look at this integration and how the communication between students and teachers and the organizations are being done, since we don't want only to promote knowledge, we also want to promote activity, to have the ability to act and to take decisions and to make choices and see how you can solve conflicts. And there you need to have a very, very full approach to achieve these issues.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Johansson, for these helpful observations. Mr. Kunz, can I move on to you and ask about sort of your thoughts or your plans for the monitoring and for assessing the effectiveness of the interventions?
Well, yes, of course, and thank you so much. I think I mentioned this one as one of our key principles, actually. This monitoring is a very important part of the program. We are using a model, HISHE, assessment instrument for higher education. And actually, we try to cover 6 fields. And we have an opportunity to have even accreditation for schools, for higher education institutions. And we have a certifying body, Hobion. And this gives at least a sort of a framework for improving the effectiveness. But I must admit, for example, circular skills, we are still in the process of investigating, exploring how to best monitor. It's a very important question, of course. And we have also other instruments we use. For example, we have a way of ranking higher education institutions. It's called Sustainable, BUL, meaning a sort of sustainability diploma, where we sort of combine the youth and the monitoring elements. And we use this HISHE model and our green compass, more for the green schools. And maybe on this different field of the vocational education, we use quite often the instrument of intervision between schools as a way of comparing notes, if you like. That would be my contribution to this debate. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Kunst. Monica Reti from Hungary, your comments, I invite your comments on the monitoring effectiveness question.
Thank you. So we have a monitoring system in the whole institutional networks in Hungary. They also have their own set of indicators. We have a central set of indicators from which they choose when they apply for a title of Eco School and Green Kindergarten. Then we monitor them against their chosen set of indicators, and those indicators, the central set of indicators, are based on international research. For example, coming from the environmental schooling initiatives and other international research. Also, we monitor teachers in their qualification processes, and of course, in pre-service teacher training. We use a European model for that, which is based on a Rwanda Sense of Purpose project research. And we do monitor schools as well against a set of criteria, including ESD. So we have quite a lot of indicators for formal education. As for informal education, it's a challenge for us to establish similar indicators or adapt any value-based indicators. And as we haven't set the exact country initiative in Hungary yet, I can't say much more about how we are going to monitor our country initiative as a specific one, but I'm sure that that we will not get away without that. So, indeed, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reti. Ms. Hadjahilea, I can't see you anymore, but if you share, yes, now I can see you.
Yes, I'm
if you
here,
share
yeah.
a few thoughts on the monitoring, measuring effectiveness of ESD implementation in Cyprus, that would be helpful.
Yes.
Thank you.
My contribution to this discussion will be in reference mostly to school education, in which we have the school sustainable development policies that schools need to create in the beginning of the school year, or and has a duration of 1 to 3 years. After designing and implementing the actions and initiatives in the field of ESD, schools need to report back to the Ministry of Education, and this is used as a mechanism for monitoring and evaluation. Also, the school principals and inspectors are engaged in seminars in which there is an opportunity to report on these initiatives happening at school. Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go
sorry,
ahead.
I'm sorry. This question is very important, since it brings us to a more substantial need that we have identified at the national level. It's since we want to expand the ESD initiative beyond schools and beyond the school units to organizations, to youth, to business, to other sectors. There is a need for a common language of understanding of why it is important to actually be engaged in these initiatives, and provide guidelines not only for monitoring, but for all levels of engagement in each of the activities and the actions implemented under the umbrella of the key priority areas. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for these observations from Cyprus. Let me move on. We just have a few minutes left, and I wanted to just raise one more issue and give the opportunity for a reply. And that is at the World Conference last week, one of the issues that repeatedly came up is the collaboration between the education sector and other sectors, because of course education for sustainable development, learning for sustainable development is really per se needs per se a multi-sectoral approach, and some of the participants also last week mentioned very much the challenges of proper collaboration mechanisms between education and other sectors. And I would just invite some short comments, starting or in particular from our regional representatives on the issue of working of the work of the education sector together with other sectors, environment of course, but not only environment, but also beyond environment. So Mr. Teutsch, if I could from the European Commission perspective invite a few comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Well, this is indeed almost the criterion for good education for sustainable development, but also more broadly for good education per se, because you also have it in some other areas. So I think we really try to promote, if I look at school or whole institution approach, we look at collaboration within the school, but clearly also to see the school in its social setting. And you can say the same for higher education or for vocational training as well. So the projects we are trying to promote, for example, they are really, I mentioned the Climate Coalition at the start. The idea there is to provide schools the opportunity to develop their own concept, but really to reach out to municipalities, to reach out to local youth initiatives, to informal associations, to local business, in order to seek how can we transform our municipality, our town, for example, to become better prepared for the future. So we do this via the exchange of good practices that we are promoting, but also with the projects. I mean, we promote with Erasmus and other funding programs lots of cooperation, because we think that better education also for the particular area we are discussing here comes a lot from more cooperation here. So it's a question of teacher education to actually think also of this making connections to outside, but in the school management and so on. It's a whole school approach we're trying to promote.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, that really goes to the heart of sort of the holistic ambitions of ESD, as you say. Tammy, let me continue with you and your thoughts about working, of course, within the education sector, but then also with other sectors and how you put that into practice.
I think I have to agree with what's just been said there, but I think it can also be an approach of, for example, the youth members in the youth network and the steering committee. All of us are active in our local communities in various youth groups which are outside of the formal education system. Maybe it's the case that it should be up to us as well to reach out to young teachers and all teachers working within the formal education system and bringing them in to the youth networks and groups working on ESD. As opposed to solely maybe expecting them to reach out to us. And I think that's really important, because they might not have any knowledge or any connection. So it's I think it's also our job and those of us active in these areas to create those links for them and those bridges to our community.
Great. Thank you very much, Tammy, for these observations. And very briefly, time is flying, unfortunately. Arabella, your observations on the issue of education sector collaboration with others.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander. I think that you raised a very critical issue regarding that the ESD and how we can communicate the message of ESD in the whole society. There is a need to go outside, because mainly in national level, the idea is that ESD is something that is most related to education system. So it's very challenging and very demanding, and I think very pressing now to bring all the stakeholders together. And I think that it's very important, our role and of course your role as a leading mechanism, to spread the message that if we want to integrate the ESD as a flagship and the main priority to create better societies, we have to bring all the interest parties together, and of course the interdepartmental, interministerial, the collaboration between private and public sector, bringing youth, the intergenerational communication and interaction are very critical parts that we have to stay on, and we have to work on this in order to communicate the message of ESD as this was expressed in the World Conference last week of Unesco. Thank you, Alexander.
Great. Thank you very much, Arabella. Michael, you have a lot of experience working with intersectoral processes. What would be your one recommendation to all of us? What to consider?
Thank you. I give you an example that worked with some of the projects with programs supported by the EU. We have managed in 8 Southern European countries to bring together around the table the different ministries and some of the organizations dealing with ESD. And actually, for the trainings we have a questionnaire before, a questionnaire after, and there is more cognitive than what they know. But they sign a commitment letter, and they provide after 6 months what information about each one, what they have done, what they have managed to bring together to their community, to the school, with other teachers and the rest. And we have a monitoring after a year, not with all of them, one-to-one. We have special persons calling them and finding out what was the follow-up. I think this gives at least the sense that what we are doing has a follow-up, a monitoring, and it has worked. Not always, but to a large extent, it shows the presence of those who either donors or those who mobilize. And it has worked. In some cases, these meetings were the first ones in the country among ministries, different ministries. You'll not be surprised to find out that in some cases, this is only once, there is no follow-up, but in other cases, this becomes a tradition.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Michael, for this very encouraging example at the end of our interventions. What remains for me is really to thank all of you for your participation today, your very, very rich contributions. I think we've seen a lot of very interesting country level work, a lot of very committed country level work, equally committed regional level work, and also regional level work, which will be able to support this very strong country commitment that is already underway. From our side, from Unesco, of course, now building on the launch of building on the big conference we organized last week, we of course are also very committed to support our member states with these country implementation activities, and to work with with the regional organizations, regional bodies, in order to provide the most efficient and effective country level support. So thank you very much again to all our panelists. Thank you very much to all the participants. I also thank the interpreters and the technicians as usual, who have done a very good job as usual. We will provide more materials and also the recordings of this and other sessions on our website, and we all look forward to staying in touch. Thank you very much to everyone, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.